Hi everybody and welcome to this video by the Vaidya's Chess Hub, and in this video I'm going to deal with castling. We will learn all about castling and I will try and help you as much as I can in understanding when you can and when you cannot castle and what are the rules regarding castling. So let's get started with this first position that I have set up for you. In this position you see that White's knight has developed itself on the f3 square. The bishop on f1 has been developed to c4, and the other knight on c3 from the b1 square, and this bishop on e3 from the c1 square. So with the development of minor pieces, White finds itself ready to castle on either side. Now the important thing to remember when you do castling is that the king must be touched first. I repeat, if you want to castle, you must touch your king first. So the king has to be touched first, and the king moves a couple of squares towards the rook, and the rook comes on the other side. Let's look at it one more time. What just happened was the king was touched first, the king moves two squares towards the rook, and the rook comes on the other side. In this position, of course, White could have castled on the queen side, and in that case again the king has to be touched first, and the king would move a couple of squares towards his rook, and the rook comes to the other side. The symbols for the short castling and long castling are different. For short castling you write 0-0, and for long castling you write 0-0-0. So that's how you write it in the score sheet. If short castling is done, you write 0-0. If long castling is done, you write 0-0-0. Let's look at another such wonderful position and learn. In this position, White cannot castle on the king side. Look at the queen, black queen on b5. She has total control over the f1 square, which the king will have to pass if he wanted to castle short. Therefore, in this position, White cannot castle on the king side, but definitely he could do the long castling. So king again should be touched first. The king would move a couple of squares towards his rook, and the rook will come to the other side. Let's look at it again. In this position, the white player could not castle on the king side because black's queen controlled the f1 square. So the king cannot pass the square f1. That's an important point to remember. Let's look at another such position. In this position, White already finds himself in a check. So bishop on b4 has delivered a check. In this position, White has a very decent move. White can just play his pawn to c3, block the check, and after the bishop moves, let's say to a5, White of course cannot castle on the queen side because of the bishop, but White, if he chooses, can definitely castle the king side, and the king should be touched first. King would move two squares towards the rook, and the rook would come to the other side. Now, interesting to note that in this particular position, if the king would have been played to e2 to get out of check, then White would lose his castling rights altogether, because if the king moves, you cannot castle. That's an important point. If the king moves, then you cannot castle, neither long castling neither long nor short. That's an important point. There is another interesting point in this position. When White was under check, if he had chosen to block the check with his bishop, if he had played bishop d2, then black could have played bishop takes d2 check, and after king takes d2, there is my point again. The king has moved. The king has moved, and so White loses his castling rights. Another question before we take a look at the next position in the mind of the beginners is, why do you castle? Well, castling ensures safety relatively. The king is safer in the corner, tucked away in the corner, rather than if the king is exposed the center. So it's a very common practice to have your king castled as quickly as possible to ensure safety. Let's take a look at another position. In this position, you will see that after the exchange of queens, White will gain an important advantage. It's White to play here, and if white plays queen takes d8 check, the only move the black will have is king takes d8. Now white hasn't gained any material advantage here because the queens were exchanged. They both lost their queens. But black had to recapture, as you can see again, black had to make the recapture with the king. And when the king moves, you know that you lose your castling right. So it's white to play. White can definitely go ahead and castle short. The king should be touched first, two squares towards the rook, and the rook comes to the other side. Of course, white couldn't have castled on the queen side here because of this bishop on c1. But black has lost his castling rights. Let's take a look at one more position. In this position, the white player cannot castle on the king side. The reason is that the king would move two squares towards the rook, but on this g1 square, you have your opponent's bishop controlling it. So white in this position cannot castle on the king side. But yes, white can certainly castle on the queen side because there's no such control over there. So white's king should be touched first. The king moves two squares towards the rook and the rook comes to the other side. Let me recap the symbols. If you do short castling, it's written as 0-0. If you do long castling, it's written as 0-0-0 in the score sheet whenever you're recording your games. Let's take a look at one more position. This is interesting because I just told you castling ensures king's safety, but sometimes in rare situations castling can be a very tactical move as well. In this position, if white player long castles, the king would come to the c1 square and the rook to the other side, which will mean that due to castling, rook on d1 places the black king under check. And so after the king moves, let's say to e7, now white has his move and white's king can capture this hanging rook on the b2 square. So what just happened here was that long castling, let's look at it again, this was a long castling, and thanks to the long castling, white was able to check the king and also attack the hanging rook on b2. It's called double attack. It's a very common tactic in chess, but sometimes castling also can be a very useful tactical weapon. So I sincerely hope that you have understood a lot from this video, and all those questions that you may have been answered. If not, leave your suggestions and your comments, and I'll try to answer even those questions which may have not been solved by this video. And as I always say, keep playing, keep enjoying, keep learning, and thank you so much for watching this video.